Hello and welcome to the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast, where we talk about anything and everything fantasy and science fiction. Your host is Matt Crosswhite, and the subject matter expert is Josiah Marshall. And here we go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi Podcast. I'm your host, Matt Crosswhite, and we're joined once again by subject matter expert Josiah Marshall. Josiah, how are you today?
I'm doing well. I'm doing well. Yesterday was a rough day, unfortunately, but thankfully today's better, and I get to hang out with my best friend. Although I miss you.
Excellent.
As we talked about in our other podcast, we got to record it together, sitting in a car in a canyon. But unfortunately, that's not today. But at least we still get to hang out and talk about fantasy.
Yes,
and science fiction.
Yes, we just spent the week together, the week of Thanksgiving, and my family and I had to fly back. So we are back in our respective states from Arizona to Utah.
Yeah,
but
doesn't stop the conversation, does it?
Absolutely not. And it was good to get to see and play with your puppies, get to hang out and joke with your kids and tell all of the grown-worthy dad jokes.
Yeah. The wives had that to no end.
Yes. I bet your wife Heather was glad not to be in the room for that.
Yeah. Still, we enjoyed having you guys, but I'm excited to get into this one because I really enjoy sharing artists, authors, and the like.
Sure.
Producers of some great work out there, and so I'm excited to share some of this with you today.
Excellent. So let's jump right in. What do you got for us?
Okay. Well, I've got an author by the name of L.B. Graham, and L.B. has been writing fantasy now and I would say science fiction to some degree. But he's been writing fantasy for roughly 20 years. And he lives, I should say, in St. Louis, Missouri. And he works as a hospital chaplain. Oh. And I don't know exactly what got him into writing, but I will say that what he has written is what I would put in category of is the epic fantasy novels of the 1980s. 70s, 80s, and into the 90s that you see with, say, Janie Wirtz, Raymond Feist, Robert Jordan. They're on that scope. So he's got a great deal of world building, and he uses fantasy characters in a very meaningful way. It's not just, and the elf picked up the shoe and they all started working on it together, sort of thing.
Sure.
He brings it into the voice of what you would see, as I said, with a lot of those authors, but also what you would see with, say, the scope of Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. He tries to make it feel epic. He makes it feel large in the sense that there's a great deal of many people going on. There's a lot of political and geopolitical factors at play, culture, society, politics, you name it. It's in the book. It's in the series.
Very nice.
And specifically, the series that I'm referring to is called The Binding of the Blade. He originally started writing this, I believe it was back in 2003, 2002. And the first book is entitled Beyond the Summerland. And then from that point, he gets into another book called Bringer of Storms. The third is Shadow in the Deep. Then he has Father of Dragons. And then finally, All My Holy Mountain. So a total of 5 books in this series. Now, I've read the entire series, but I'm going to break these down into basically one-word statements, or I should say one-sentence statements.
Okay.
That in the first book, you've got a delicate piece that's threatened by this bad guy and ultimately broken by betrayal. And then it goes on into more detailed events regarding even the second book involves the Civil War and how this bad guy empties the mountain where all this horde and army of his resides. And the question is, can anything withstand, quote, the bringer of storms, as the second one's entitled? And then ultimately you get more into the precarious nature of this world with the third book, where rains fall, flood rises, sort of thing. More things are just happening, and it keeps getting worse. And then a mysterious shadow lurks in the deep, so to speak. And then you've got the fifth book, The Father of Dragons, is that ultimate stand, that final stand, and a desperate hope that you get even from Lord of the Rings, where it's all coming down to this event. And the hope and question of, will the Father of Dragons actually come back? Will he arise? And then finally, that ultimate battle. I said the stand earlier, but the last book, All My Holy Mountain, is about that final battle. And as most of these books tend to orient themselves, as a willingness to sacrifice what you love most dear in order to see to the future of your children. And then and that strength that strength that tends to aid to have that ultimate victory. So it's almost the quintessential stuff, I would say. It is definitely the quintessential stuff of story making and telling. But he definitely does it from a Christian perspective. He has the characters praying. Now, granted, the praying is a bit more neutral. He's not necessarily incorporating a lot of what would be considered evangelical vocabulary. But he's definitely making it clear that there's an ultimate creator, and that these people, even the wizard that he has in here, serves at the, wizard type. He serves at the will of that creator. And so you definitely get this biblical atmosphere, biblical nuance, that what he is being influenced by is scripture. And to the point where he even, the wizard type is actually a prophet. He uses that word blatantly. This guy is a prophet. He's been around for thousands of years. His name is Valzan. And he remembered the first and ultimate betrayal. And now the first book is set over 1,000 years, I believe, from that first onset of problems due to this Titan. So there's a council of Titans. He borrowed the number 12 from scripture. And so we've got a council of 12 Titans, and how one of them, who all of them were created by the creator, one of them betrayed his duties and wanted to rule himself. So as I said, kind of the quintessential stuff, but even also some stuff that is pretty obviously from scripture. That does not, however, deter from the enjoyment. He is an actionable based writer. Now, I wouldn't go as far as to put him in the category of, say, poetical prose or colorful imagination. I would say that instead his imagination is pretty straightforward. He's thinking of specific characters in a specific place, doing specific things. And so sometimes as a result, his especially the dialogue ends up getting a little stilted, and the tone of the dialogue can vary based on either the scene or where he's at in the book. And so I wouldn't call him a brand new writer, but I would say that you could have used a more editing polish, so to speak.
Okay.
Some stronger.
As you were describing each of the books with your one line, Mentally, I was walking through the Book of Revelation, a
Yeah,
tentative piece that it gets broken by betrayal, leading up to the
mhm.
final climactic battle, having wondered if the king will ever come back.
Right, right. And that's really the scenario that he puts his characters in, wondering, and even the main protagonist, while he's aware of certain things historically and presently within his world, he does go through a series of events of learning more about the historical factors at play, and specifically what these large structures are. He knows that these are structures where dragons used to land. They'd land on these large structures,
Hmm.
and the dragon would stay there as a titan would visit a certain area of this land. But aside from that, he doesn't really understand what happened before besides the general aspects of it. He couldn't go into any
Okay.
detail per se. But the interesting premises of the first book is that the land has come to an understanding that in order for them to be able to work together, in order to maintain their vigilance, but also their unity and against this bad guy named Malik, they send some of their children when they reach a certain age. Not all of the children, but a certain strata of society goes to a place called the Summerland, and there they learn together, they work together, and it's an opportunity for them to understand each other's perspective that otherwise would have been separated by miles, hundreds, thousands of miles. And the there's some fun stuff that's definitely incorporated that are definitely on the fantasy realm. One guy, in fact, has that special attachment and a bond to a tiger, and
Ooh.
they're kind of battle partners, battle buddies, but also life buddies at the same time. And there's a really neat backstory to that. That it's I wouldn't say that it's too simple, but it's definitely more on the simple realm of going. He's not trying to fluff anything up, and he's not trying to be too wordy. But I thought, you could add a little bit more pizzazz into this if you wanted. But at the same
Hmm.
time, it was still fun for him to introduce that character. He also introduces some of the creatures that they deal with. And the way he did it was actually pretty well. I think it was pretty decent. And these are characters that were made by this fallen Titan. And so they're built for battle, and they're very tough and strong. And so it takes a great deal of effort to actually kill them. And
Gotcha.
but ultimately, of the first book, you've got this group of young people coming together at Summerland, and they get attacked. And even just as they come together, they start talking. They realize, wait a minute, all of us have been waylaid by creatures that shouldn't be where we found them. They're usually somewhere else, and yet they're venturing out. Something else you tend to hear in fantasy, right? So,
Yep.
the first book ends up them going off in pursuit of some signs that the bad guy may be back, and then coming back with the knowledge. Yep, not only is he back, he's come back strong.
Hmm.
There is some twists in it that I thought were pretty well done. He put them in pretty well. He definitely created a decent engine to keep the action going. And there's a twist at the end. I'm going to let the people read it, let you read it, because the twist at the end was actually very unexpected. But yet he built up to it quite well. He dropped a few seeds here and there, but the way he did it was really superb. So overall, I would say that the series is good. It definitely, for the average collector of fantasy, it has some decent cover art. The bindings don't tend to be as colorful as the cover itself, but at least you still get that hint of what the cover could be based on face or figure on smaller portion
Sure.
of the spine. But so far, the book is available in hard copy, paperback, hardcover, and then also in digital. I have not yet seen an audiobook. Not to say it might not be, it's not out there, but it might be. But these are definitely some ways to at least get into it. And the neat thing is that the Kindle books or the digital tend to be relatively inexpensive. So I've picked them up for as little as $5 a piece.
Oh, very nice.
Yes.
Very nice.
So the odd thing about Christian fantasy is that the publishing houses that tend to try to pick them up, it doesn't really bode well for them because, as in another case of another author, they ended up having to completely dismantle their entire fantasy line and thus cancel the rest of another author's series altogether. And so,
oh wow,
I understand that a great deal of these authors the copyrights have come back to them. And so they have more control and they get to still get it out there. But these aren't well marketed. Now, some would argue because they're not that amazing. It could have used more editing. It could have probably used more world development, whatever the case may be. But suffice it to say, they're out there. And for the average reader, it could still be very enjoyable, especially when you've got things like dragons, giants, titans to some degree, elves, and talking bears. That you get an idea are similar to Little John from Robin Hood. They use a staff for their weapon and for their defense. I like the bears. He did a phenomenal job on the bears. He really did. It's obvious he spent some good time on developing the conclaves and the way the bears live. It's really a lot of fun when it comes to the bears.
Excellent. Excellent.
But yeah, so they're out there. They're on Amazon, and I would say that they're at least a one-time worth read. And I would put them somewhere between 11, 12, maybe even as high as 13, because there are some elements even in the first book that you go, I don't know. I know that Christian parents tend to vary on what they feel comfortable with. So it's just whatever they're comfortable with. But for the most part, I would say that a 12-year-old, it would be appropriate for a 12-year-old and that they would really get a lot out of it. Even as far as the positions the characters are put in and the decisions that they're forced to make. So overall, I would give it maybe a 6, 7.
Okay.
Out of 10.
Which
we haven't really gotten to a scale, podcast, really.
Right. And on our podcast, this is our first episode of what we might call Josiah's Book Corner. So that puts it in the top slot so far.
Yeah. So for the average fantasy reader, go check it out. It's worth trying. If it doesn't meet your cup of tea, well, then at least you said you tried. But yeah, that's out there. And it definitely incorporates a lot of scripture to the point where it's almost kind of blatant of how much he borrowed. And you can keep making these connections going, okay, the connection to like the number 12 and that there's 12 disciples and there's 12 tribes and now there's 12 titans kind of pulls you out of the story. So if you're able to turn that part of your brain off, you can maintain your presence in the book.
Gotcha.
So, but he, I didn't remember him getting particularly preachy, so to speak, until maybe the last book. So, but yeah, there you go.
Excellent.
Does that sound interesting to you? Is it something that you would want to read?
It sounds terrific to me, and the idea of being able to get each of the books for $5 a piece, or somewhere thereabouts, get a 5-book series for $25. That sounds great.
Digitally speaking, absolutely. And given that it's the holidays, I wouldn't be a bit surprised if at some point, I know we just passed Digital Monday and Black Friday, but I would still imagine that for Christmas, it'd still go down. Maybe.
Very nice.
But the hard copies, I picked them up around $10 to $13 a piece.
Okay, excellent.
Yep.
But before we sign off for today, I happen to know that you have been working on your fantasy novel, sir. Can you tell us how that's going and when we might be able to expect that one?
Oh, you're putting me on the spot. I'll admit I've had an interesting relationship with my novel. It's been more of a therapy tool for me over the course of many, many years. I've often said, well, I'm going to get it published in 1 year. I used to say that 15 years ago.
Yeah. You
And
just aren't telling anybody which 1 year.
Yeah, right. And it's been something I've worked on and off on, and it's just been one of those things where I enjoy it, and it's just something to so my wife would do a puzzle, I tinker on my book. I'll put it that way. And so it's only been recently that I've gotten incredibly encouraged, and I would even dare say motivated to actually get this thing published. Because, well, thanks to you and my kids, I'm getting, Dad, I want to read the next chapter. So I was even, as I said earlier to you today, I've already worked on one chapter recently, and I think you guys are going to like some of the edits that I made to it. But I don't know when it will come out. I'll just say that. But I have a plan to continue to work on it. And already this month, my goals are very close to being met. And so I'm very happy and I dare I say proud of that. So because sometimes actually sitting down and writing that doesn't always happen.
Oftentimes that can be the biggest challenge.
Yeah. But I have actually thought of developing a web page where I put in maybe a little bit of a teaser here, give the people give a reader or somebody something to read, get introduced to some of the characters through maybe some sort of short bio. So I don't know. Definitely, I've had some thoughts about it, but we'll see what happens as we go along. But if it does happen, if it does come out, then it'll be entitled The Crystal Tree.
Crystal Tree.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, we will continue to check in with you on that as months progress, and doesn't sound like it'll make its way into stockings this Christmas, but maybe
No.
maybe we'll keep checking in, see if you can give it to the love of your life for Valentine's Day.
Oh, yeah, she's actually read it. She's either read or heard it read through in its entirety, and she's given some phenomenal feedback. And dare I say, you have actually given me some great feedback just this past week when you read some of it. So it's encouraging to see that it's of interest to somebody else, and that it's of interest to a level where they go, you know what, this is good. I don't expect it to be perfect, and I don't expect a lot of people to like it, but I like it and I'm enjoying it. So here you go.
Excellent. And with that, we'll bring our episode to a close. Thank you for joining us today on the Christian Fantasy and Sci-Fi podcast. And until you listen to our voices again, keep reading or listening to your audiobooks, and we'll touch base next time.